The night the lie collapsed, June 4th, 1943. The pencil shook ever so slightly in Unteroffizier Werner Burkhardt's hand as he wrote in the secret diary he hid in the lining of his tunic. If his officers found it, he'd face solitary confinement. Perhaps worse. Yet he needed to write. He needed to process what he was seeing. He pressed his face against the train window and stared out into the warm Texas night. And what he saw contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had taught him for years. It was nearly 10 p.m., yet the world outside was glowing with light. Farmhouses lit like Christmas trees, entire streets illuminated, shops with bright electric signs, miles upon miles of glowing bulbs stretching endlessly across the plains. Burkhardt had grown up in a Germany where black outlaws plunged every city into darkness since 1940, where electricity was rationed and rural areas lived with barely any power at all. In his home village, people still lit oil lamps. But here, light flowed as freely as air. He stared in disbelief. They told us America was collapsing, he wrote. They told us the country was weak, decadent, dying. Yet I have never seen such abundance. The train slowed. Steam vented. Metal groaned. 1,850 men, veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps, stepped out of the Pullman coaches. Not cattle cars, not wooden wagons, but luxury passenger coaches with cushioned seats, dining service, even sleeping berths. The citizens of Mexia, Texas, had gathered along the tracks, curious, watching quietly as their former enemies disembarked. None of them realized they were witnessing the beginning of one of the greatest psychological transformations of World War II, a dismantling of Nazi ideology not through speeches or force, but through the overwhelming reality of American prosperity. And it had begun weeks earlier, on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia, the fall of Afrika Korps. General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's successor, had surrendered along with between 250,000 and 275,000 German and Italian soldiers, including the toughest desert veterans in the Wehrmacht. The men who had pushed the British to the gates of Egypt now stood defeated, disarmed, exhausted. Among them was Hauptmann Friedrich Radke, a decorated officer with the Iron Cross First Class. His diary, recovered decades later, became a window into the minds of these prisoners. Their first stop was the port of Oran, Algeria. 30,000 prisoners packed into holding areas, waiting for transport across the Atlantic. Yet even here, American organizations stunned them. Processing stations ran like clockwork. Identification photos, medical inspections, inoculations, paperwork, translation services. Geneva Convention rights explained flawlessly in German. Radke noted bitterly, "The Americans processed thousands of us daily with more efficiency than the Wehrmacht ever achieved." But the first real shock came with the food. The first crack in the facade. Oberstfreiter Hans Mahler, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, wrote to his mother months later, "In the cages at Oran, we ate better than in 6 months of desert war. Real coffee, white bread, fresh meat twice a day. At first, the prisoners assumed it was a trick, some kind of propaganda effort meant to impress them. They were wrong. It was simply the standard American military ration. Then came the Liberty ships, the ships that defied German belief. Most German prisoners didn't know it yet, but the vessel carrying them, one of the 2,710 Liberty ships built, was part of an industrial miracle beyond anything imaginable in the Reich. Some Liberty ships had been constructed in 4 days. The men aboard stared at the massive steel hulls, the radar antennae rotating on the bridges, the endless cargo being loaded and unloaded. Unteroffizier Kurt Zimmermann wrote in disbelief, "The American sailors threw away more food each day than our unit received in a week. Half-eaten steaks, loaves of bread, milk by the gallon, not out of cruelty, not to mock the prisoners. Simply because the supply was so vast that waste meant nothing." Zimmermann added, "Their garbage was wealth." It was the first moment many realized the truth. Germany had not been fighting an equal enemy. It had been fighting an industrial civilization of unimaginable scale. And the shock only deepened when the ships approached the American coastline. The first sight of America, Norfolk Naval Base. August 2nd, 1943. Fog lifted. Horn sounded. The Liberty ships entered the sprawling naval base at Norfolk, Virginia. What the prisoners saw shattered every remaining illusion of Nazi propaganda. Endless docks. Cranes unloading dozens of ships simultaneously. Columns of trucks. Rows of automobiles owned by ordinary dock workers. Machinery beyond German industrial capacity. One prisoner wrote, "This one port handles more in a day than Hamburg handles in a week." Another noted, "German propaganda lied to us about everything." And then came the trains. Not cattle cars, not packed troop wagons, but Pullman passenger cars with padded seats, sleeping berths, dining service, and even air conditioning. Air conditioning. The German officers could only stare. One American guard apologized. "Sorry, the air conditioning isn't working properly today." A German lieutenant whispered, "Air conditioning for prisoners?" The journey that followed would finally destroy Nazi ideology, because the trains rolled straight to the real America, and the prisoners saw everything. The train ride that destroyed Nazism. As the trains crossed Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky, the prisoners pressed their faces to the windows like children. Everywhere, electric lights, running factories, cars parked outside homes, signs glowing late into the night, neighborhoods illuminated like festivals. Cities that Germans assumed were peasant villages had more electricity than Berlin. A captured engineer wrote, "The waste was magnificent. Lights, Camp Hearn, Texas. A vast expanse of wooden barracks, guard towers, floodlights, and tidy walkways." But what stunned the newly arrived German prisoners was not the size of the camp. It was the comfort. The barracks had electric lights, real mattresses, hot showers, flush toilets, steam heating, windows with insect screens. For men who had spent months living in foxholes, desert sandstorms, and collapsing bunkers, this was surreal. Hauptmann Friedrich Radke, the veteran officer whose diary will become one of the most important records of the POW experience, wrote, "These barracks contain more lumber and equipment than my entire village in East Prussia." The shock didn't end there. Medical care beyond anything in Germany. The camp hospital was unlike anything the prisoners expected. X-ray machines, fully stocked surgical rooms, American nurses working alongside German medical officers. Penicillin, that last detail, nearly broke many prisoners emotionally. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, former surgeon of the 164th Light Division, later testified, "They used penicillin freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. In Germany, we had soldiers dying for lack of the most basic drugs." The men stared at shelves full of medical supplies that hadn't existed in Germany since 1941. It was as if they had stepped into a different century. The kitchen that shattered minds. The camp kitchen was another revelation. German prisoners assigned to kitchen duty expected to see pots over fires, hand-powered grinders, and long hours of manual labor. Instead, they found walk-in refrigerators, gas-powered ranges, automated dishwashing machines, electric mixers, industrial ovens, cold storage rooms the size of houses. And then came the food: fresh milk, eggs, vegetables, meat, real meat served daily. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich, wrote, "We threw away more food today than my family has seen in 3 years. The surplus wasn't show. It wasn't propaganda. It was American regulation. Prepare 10% extra to ensure no prisoner goes hungry." Krebs later admitted he cried while throwing perfectly good bread into the garbage. A new kind of labor, seeing America up close. By September 1943, America faced a labor shortage. With millions of U.S. men overseas, farms and factories lacked hands. German POWs became essential, and this decision inadvertently became the single most devastating blow to Nazi ideology. Prisoners traveled across the countryside daily, escorted but not blindfolded. They saw farms with tractors worth more than a German officer's salary, barns with electric lighting, homes with refrigerators, radios, washing machines, workers of all races eating full meals, fields that stretch for miles, machinery that replaced entire villages of manual labor. factories running day and night. At a cotton gin outside Houston, Unterofficer Herbert Lang watched a single machine process more cotton in 1 hour than his entire village could handle in a month. He wrote, "This farmer was no aristocrat, no party member, just a farmer. Yet he had electricity, cars, tractors, running water. Even his laborers ate lunches richer than an officer's ration." This was not the world described by Nazi propaganda. This was something else entirely, a democracy that worked, and that terrified them far more than any American weapon. Agriculture that defied German imagination. In Nebraska, German POWs worked on sugar beet fields. In Kansas, they helped with the wheat harvest. And everywhere, they saw machines replacing human labor at an unimaginable scale. A single combine did the work of 100 German farmers. Yields were double German averages. Storage elevators held more grain than entire German regions. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote, "The farmer's teenage son drove a tractor worth more than everything my father owned." When he commented on it, the American boy laughed. This isn't even the good tractor. Dad's waiting for the new model. To the POWs, it was like witnessing a civilization from another planet. Factories that redefined power. Thousands of German POWs were assigned to work near factories, not in war production, but in supporting industries that freed American workers to build weapons. And what they witnessed inside these plants seared itself into their memories forever. At a Campbell's soup plant in New Jersey, prisoners watched machines peel, slice, cook, and can vegetables with almost no human input. Stabs fell with Bull Ernst Wagner, who had worked at a German food processing plant, wrote, "One elderly American woman operated machinery that would require 50 German workers. At the River Rouge complex, Germans saw 100,000 workers, rivers of steel, endless assembly lines, automobiles rolling out in minutes, airplane engines stacked like produce." Oberstfreiter Franz Kellner wrote, "Workers here own cars. Some owned too. In Germany, even officers didn't. The POWs began whispering to each other, what if everything we believed was wrong? How can we win against this? Why did they tell us America was weak?" The cracks in ideology widened. An empire of electricity and plenty. As POW trains moved deeper into the American heartland, they passed through the industrial corridor of the Midwest. Factories, power plants, warehouses, rail yards, highways packed with trucks, cities lined with neon signs. Even at midnight, Heinrich Müller, an electrical engineer, wrote, "I calculated that the railway yard we stopped and used more electricity in 1 hour than my entire Berlin district used in a day." The prisoners realized something terrifying. America was not only stronger than Germany, it was stronger than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined, even before mobilizing fully for war. This realization would soon explode into full ideological collapse. But the breaking point was still ahead. It would arrive with feelings, not factories, with kindness, not power, with Christmas. December 1943. Snow dusted the roofs of the barracks at Camp Hearn, and the prisoners expected nothing. They were the enemy. They were the men who had bombed London, shelled American troops, and fought for Hitler's dream. What they received instead was something that shook many of them to their core. On Christmas morning, 500,000 gift packages, sent by American churches, families, civic groups, and volunteers, arrived at POW camps across the United States. Cigarettes, candy, toiletries, games, personal notes, hand-drawn Christmas cards from American children. German prisoners stood silent, stunned. Feldwebel Hans Müller wrote, "They treated us better than our own army ever treated Soviet prisoners, better than our commanders treated us." In Texas, the local Methodist church choir came to camp and performed Christmas songs in German. Women from the town baked homemade cookies. Boy Scouts brought cards. American guards, young men whose brothers were fighting in Europe, treated their captives with kindness, almost embarrassment, as if hospitality was simply expected. Hauptmann Radke wrote, American humanity was more powerful than their weapons. But the most devastating psychological blow came at dinner. The holiday meal included turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, ice cream. For many German soldiers, this was the richest meal they had seen in their entire lives. Feldwebel Hansa wrote, "We ate until we were ill. We ate better as prisoners than German generals ate in wartime." And the guards told us this was a normal American Christmas. That night, dozens of prisoners cried in their bunks, not because of sadness, but because the foundations of everything they had believed about racial superiority and ideological purity were collapsing. The enemy was more humane than the Reich, more generous, more prosperous, more free. This realization was a turning point. German identity begins to unravel. By early 1944, the psychological transformation accelerated. American fears that POWs might remain loyal Nazis faded. Instead, the U.S. Army found itself overwhelmed by German prisoners requesting books, newspapers, language courses, political education, scientific materials. Major Paul Newland, part of the re-education monitoring team, reported, "The most fanatical Nazis have gone quiet. They no longer speak of victory. Many question everything they believed. Power-run newspapers, over 130 of them, began shifting from defiant nationalism to discussions of democracy, economics, American society, the future of Germany, the failures of Nazi leadership." Lieutenant Hermann Gutz wrote in a censored letter, "We were told America was weak and divided. Here I see unity, efficiency, technology, abundance. Everything we were told was a lie. What shattered them next wasn't wealth, but fairness." The Italian Revelation. When Italy surrendered in September 1943, Italian POWs in America were suddenly treated differently. Those who chose to cooperate were given better quarters, more freedom, civilian clothes, paid work, access to American towns. German prisoners watched their former allies being treated better than Germany ever treated them, even as allies. Oberfeldwebel Friedrich Schultz wrote, "We treated Italians like inferiors. The Americans treat them like human beings. This democracy we mocked is nobler than our own system." For many, this was the final crack in Nazi racial theory. The rise of education, the death of propaganda. The U.S. launched Special Projects Division, a covert re-education initiative. But in truth, the prisoners didn't need propaganda. Reality itself had done the work. By March 1944, 40,000 plus prisoners were enrolled in classes. 30,000 studied English. 15,000 took vocational training. 8,000 participated in university correspondence courses. Top American universities sent professors to teach in the camps. Physics, chemistry, economics, political science, American history, agriculture. The hunger for knowledge was overwhelming. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist captured in Tunisia, attended lectures on atomic science at Camp Shelby. He later wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees, taught us without hatred. They spoke of science belonging to all humanity." To men raised under Nazi censorship, this intellectual openness was intoxicating. Hollywood and the power of honesty. Camp theaters played American films, not propaganda, not sanitized content, but real Hollywood movies. And this shocked the prisoners even more than the factories. They watched Gone with the Wind, depicting American defeat and struggle. They watched The Grapes of Wrath, showing poverty and government failure. They saw movies criticizing American society with brutal honesty. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer was stunned. They hide nothing. They show their flaws, conflicts, weaknesses. This honesty makes them stronger, not weaker. In Nazi Germany, such films would have resulted in imprisonment or execution. Here, they were shown to the enemy. The POWs realized something profound. A government confident enough to show its failures is stronger than one that hides everything. This realization deepened the ideological collapse. Work in America's industrial giants. As 1944 advanced, the POW labor program expanded. And now the German prisoners were sent to the beating heart of the American war machine. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, they saw 700 landing craft built per month, 20,000 workers, women and African Americans welding, riveting, driving cranes, assembly lines running 24/7, 20,000 parts per boat. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmerman wrote, "They told us democracy was weak, yet I saw women and black workers building the machines that would conquer Europe." Then came Republic Steel in Ohio. 10,000 tons of steel produced daily. Blast furnaces operating without pause. More output than the entire Ruhr region at its peak. Oberstfreiter Paul Hartmann wrote, "This one plant wastes more steel than Germany produces." The scale was beyond comprehension. Agriculture that fed the world. Summer 1944. German POWs worked the largest farmlands they had ever seen. In Kansas, they watched combines harvesting 100 acres a day. In California's Central Valley, fruit farms stretched beyond the horizon. Prisoners saw mountains of oranges bulldoze because they were slightly blemished. Gefreiter Otto Schultz wrote, "They destroy food to keep prices stable. We begged them to send it to our starving families. They said it was impossible. I realized then, America's waste alone could feed Europe." This single insight shattered the last remnants of belief in German superiority. The news that completed the collapse. D-Day, June 6, 1944. When news of the Normandy invasion reached the camps, German prisoners watched newsreels in stunned silence. They saw 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 troops, artificial harbors, supply lines that stretched across open beaches, an organization beyond anything the Nazi state could have imagined. Unteroffizier Franz von Tauben wrote, "With D-Day we understood not only the war was lost, but the entire worldview we had been raised with." The final blow didn't come from American weapons. It came from American capacity, organization, production, logistics, scale, freedom, diversity, humanity, and every day German POWs saw more of it. They had been told America was weak. Instead, they discovered the most powerful society on earth. By early 1945, the German POWs in America had undergone a transformation so deep that even American officials struggled to understand it. It wasn't the food. It wasn't the electricity. It wasn't even the industrial scale. It was the humanity. American officers consistently distinguished German people from the Nazi regime. They refused to punish prisoners for Hitler's crimes. They treated wounded POWs with the same care as their own soldiers. They offered condolences when German families were killed in Allied bombings. Oberstfreiter Hans Muller wrote after receiving news that his son had died in Hamburg, "The American commander brought me the Red Cross message himself. He spoke to me as a father, not an enemy." At that moment, Germany felt farther away than ever. This kindness shook the prisoners more deeply than any military defeat. They had grown up in a regime that glorified brutality, and now they were being treated better by their enemies than by their own leaders. The cracks in Nazi ideology widened into a canyon, the final shattering of the myth. Then came the last blow. In April 1945, American troops liberated the first Nazi concentration camps. Soon after, U.S. officials showed the filmed evidence to POW camps across America. Many Germans refused to believe it at first, insisting it had to be propaganda. Then letters from home arrived, testimonies, photographs, confessions from German civilians. The truth became undeniable. Hauptmann Walter Schmidt wrote, "We believed we were warriors for civilization. Instead, we learned we had served a criminal empire." Many POWs collapsed in shame. Others became violently ill. Some wept openly, unable to reconcile the reality with the ideology they once embraced. The Reich had not only lost the war, it had lost its moral legitimacy. And every German prisoner now understood it. The rebuilding of minds and a nation. When the war ended in May 1945, over 371,000 German POWs were held in American camps. They would soon be returned to a homeland in ruins. But America did not send them home empty-handed. They received vocational training, courses in democracy, modern agricultural education, English language instruction, lessons on civic society, materials to help rebuild post-war Germany. Prisoners learned about the Marshall Plan before the public did. They were shown that America intended not to destroy Germany, but to rebuild it. Oberfeldwebel Friedrich von Tauben wrote, "They prepared us for the Germany we would create after Hitler. They gave us hope, skills, and dignity. They helped us imagine a country worth returning to. For men raised in dictatorship, this was revolutionary. The return and the unexpected legacy. Between 1945 and 1946, hundreds of thousands of POWs returned to Germany. They found cities flattened, family homes destroyed, factories in rubble, a defeated population, a morally devastated nation. But the former POWs carried something powerful, a vision of what a free, democratic, prosperous society looked like. Many became leaders in rebuilding Germany. Hans Kroll, ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, president of the European Commission. Rudiger von Marx, German representative to the United Nations. Eduard Ackermann, leader in German agricultural reform. Their influence shaped the German economic miracle of the 1950s. Hans Kroll later wrote, "We learned that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest, from dignity, not racial theory, from cooperation, not tyranny." The seeds of modern democratic Germany were planted in American prison camps. The 1985 reunion, enemies turned friends. In 1985, over 500 former German POWs returned to Texas for a reunion, to the same place where their ideological transformation began. Now elderly men, many brought their families to show them the land that had reshaped their lives. Former Oberstfreiter Hans Vetter said, "Life in the camps was better than life under the Nazis." Former Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Meyer added, "American farmers treated us as human beings. They shared meals with us. This kindness changed us forever." The final speech came from former Lieutenant Hermann Gutz. "We arrived in America as Nazis. We left as Democrats. America showed us that true strength lies not in cruelty, but in freedom, diversity, and prosperity. You won our minds not with bombs, but with example." The auditorium erupted in applause. Enemies had become allies. Fighters had become friends. Prisoners had become witnesses to democracy. This was not a story of defeat, but of redemption. Epilogue, the most powerful weapon. Historians would later call the German POW experience in America the most successful re-education program in history. Not because of propaganda, not because of coercion, but because of evidence. Every prisoner saw it. Every electric light, every full plate of food, every modern machine, every act of kindness, every thriving city, every democratic institution, every opportunity open to rich and poor alike. They had been raised on lies. But America showed them the truth, and in that truth lay the final defeat of Nazism. The German POWs came as warriors of the Reich. They returned as architects of democracy, and the world is better for it.